If you have done nothing wrong, you have nothing to be afraid of. Sincerely, every tyrant, everywhere, always. Even my grandpa used to say that you should trust the cops because if you got nothing to hide, then you got nothing to worry about. He was very wrong. Very wrong. There are many things that you should worry about even if you have nothing to hide. I think that you should have things to hide. Like your identity. I don't think you should have to give up your identity to anybody, including, especially, governments. And these economic forum places, WHO and all of that.
Dans ce nouveau monde, on doit accepter une transparence, et je dirais même une transparence totale. Tout va être transparent. Et il faut s'habituer.
Everything is going to be transparent. Says who? Or WEF. Nah, they're both the same thing.
Il faut se comporter ainsi.
You have to behave accordingly.
Intégré dans votre personnalité, mais si on n'a rien
integrated into your personality. So they're just going to change how everybody thinks. And it's working. The people it doesn't work on, they're just going to murder them.
Il ne faut pas avoir peur.
Yeah. What was that? But if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be afraid. This right here needs to happen. Ooh, what's this?
Davos is, of course, going on at the moment, and the great Tony Blair is at Davos. He is rumoured to want now to take over from Klaus Schwab as the boss of it. Here were some words of advice from Tony Blair today.
In the end, you need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that.
So there he is.
Yeah, and COVID was the perfect example of why that just does not work. Because the people who resisted ended up being in the right. Because there was no point to getting the COVID vaccine. That's not even an opinion. Like, what is the point? Because I know people that got all of the vaccines, all of the boosters. They were more sick than I was. Everybody still around them still got sick. So, what was the point? And they still tell you to get it.
And I also think this issue to do with the technology and the digital infrastructure, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is. Because in the end, you need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of them down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that. So again, you've got to say, okay, who are the people that can make this happen? How do you get the right partnerships in place? So my view is, this is what I'm arguing with that should happen in the G20 particularly, I think, which is, I mean, G7 is an important forum, but the G20 is the broader forum, is you've got to work out what is it that you want to achieve in order to make sure that any future pandemic is properly handled, and what are the partnerships that you're going to create in order to ensure that the answers you get are the right answers. And then you're going to have the mechanisms of implementation. And those mechanisms will be partly through the formal institutions that you have, like the WTO, but they'll also be through organizations like yours, which I think, you know, have many advantages because they don't get landed with the same bureaucracy and, frankly, small p politics around them. So I think, you know, that's what we need to do. But if you want the politicians to focus on a plan, I promise you it's got to be because they think in the next few years, not in the broad future, it's going to matter to them.
From my experience, leaving things to politicians ends up in civil war every time because they don't know what they're doing. They're just following the clicks and the money, and it just destroys everything, and they pretend like they have a good heart about it. But then when they don't know what they're doing, they're not going to tell you they don't know what they're doing. They're not going to tell you that the thing that they're doing could possibly kill a bunch of people. They're just going to do it and tell you you're wrong and try and cover it up.
We are so far, globally, we are so far above the population and the consumption levels which can be supported by this planet that I know in one way or another it's going to come back down. So I don't hope to avoid that. I hope that it can occur in a civil way, and I mean civil in
a civil way. Fewer humans. Civil way. Think about that. What he means by that.
Special way. Peaceful. Peace doesn't mean that everybody's happy, but it means that conflict isn't solved through violence, through force, but rather in other ways. And so that's what I hope for.
Yeah, and you don't do it by force. What you do is you rile people up and let them do the fighting for you so you don't have to force anybody to do anything, and then you come in and clean up the mess.
That we can, I mean, the planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending.
Maybe 2 billion, so you don't know. I think we're supporting, 9 billion? I think we're supporting 9 billion just fine. It's just that the governments are shitty and just don't do the right thing, hardly ever. The only reason people around the world even starve is because of political nonsense.
On how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. I mean, we could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart. That's, unfortunately, you never have smart dictatorships. They're always stupid. So, but if
we could have bigger population. We could sustain the population we have now if we have a dictatorship. What? When has a dictatorship ever proved to work? And he says smart. That is the move to get every last human on Earth killed. Which I know, you know what? I don't care. Let them do it. Nobody's going to stop them. Nobody's even going to try. Everybody's going to buy into this bullshit and just let them do it. And then I'm just going to be waiting to be called home. I say that a lot. But at this point, that's what's happening.
If you had a smart dictatorship and a low standard of living, you can have it. But we want to have freedom and we want to have a high sentence, so we're going to have 1 billion.
Low standard living, he says. A dictator with low standard living. So he wants you to live in boxes, live in the pod, eat the bugs.
People. And we're now at 7, so we have to get back down. I hope that this can be slow, relatively slow, and that it can be done in a way which is relatively equal.
We need more production. We need more people. We do not need less people. We need more people.
So that people share the experience, and you don't have a few rich, trying to force everybody else to deal with it. So those are my hopes. I mean,
isn't that what
pretty
they're doing?
Hopes, but I mean, that's what lies ahead.
Well, that was gross. Anything else? Anything else?
You love them, admit it. They're now warning of the potential of another pandemic.
Of course.
Buckle up. it could be 20 times worse than COVID-19.
Anything happening is a matter of when, not if. So we need to have a placeholder for that, for the disease we don't know. That may
Yeah, they're preparing to take control of everything when the next pandemic hits. And if they want control over everything, they're going to cause the pandemic.
come. And that was when we gave the name Disease X.
Oh my God, he even sounds like a complete fiend, doesn't he? Well, but according to the WHO Director General, his new global pandemic agreement, which contains a lot of really bad stuff, is at risk of falling apart.
The IMB and the IHR working group are operating amid a torrent of fake news, lies, and conspiracy theories. We cannot allow this historic agreement, this milestone in global health, to be sabotaged by those who spread lies, either deliberately or unknowingly.
Well, let me just tell you, the proposed treaty that has a deadline of May 2024, it would give the WHO control of international supply chains, and it also emphasizes race and equity, among other things. Joining me now,
Of course it does.
Dr. Scott Atlas, Hoover Institution Senior Fellow, former Trump White House COVID advisor. Now, Dr. Atlas, now, when I hear him talk about disease X, there's nothing wrong with, idea of planning and everyone try to be prepared. There's nothing wrong with that. But boy, they shattered their
Yeah, and they're not planning to be prepared for the pandemic. They're planning to take control so they can even have control. I don't know how else to put it. They just want control. And they think that it's for your own good. But then you're going to live in the pod and eat the bugs. How is that good? Do you want that? I don't want that.
credibility on so many issues. And most people, they hear this and they think plandemic. That's what most people are thinking now.
Yep.
Well, Laura, you've hit on something here, which is the shattering. The WHO has shattered trust in public health agencies, along with our own CDC and our own leaders, by the
I never trusted them to begin with. You can't shatter trust that was never there.
way. Why? Because they issued pseudoscience-based mandates. They issued erratic guidance. They had no transparency when it counted, when people were afraid. And the reality is, you're right, the accord is a problem because it, A, circumvents Congress, so there's no approval, and it's legally binding. And the problem is not just the mentions of equity more than a dozen times and other social things, it defines health emergency in your country. And that's the gateway for all kinds of mandates that we've just lived through. It also regulates IP. It requires distribution. It affects pricing of goods. I mean, no sovereign nation would want to do that. And the problem is, under this director, Tedros, the WHO is the greatest purveyor of misinformation, rivaling our own Fauci, Birx, and our own CDC. They backed China's lies that said there was no human-human transmission. They praised China's transparency. In January 2020 and February 2020, they literally backed China covering up and blocking the WHO itself from investigating the lab in Wuhan.
I remember, we covered it.
2021. And then, yeah, I mean, this is outrageous. They called China, Tedros specifically said China is a model of pandemic management with the most barbaric human rights violations, since in our modern history. By the way, Tedros is
I've heard people say that they're jealous of what China accomplished with COVID. I saw some of the videos that China did with COVID, and they were straight up killing people at the beginning. And probably throughout all of it, they probably just found a better way to cover it up. People were locked in their homes. People were screaming because they were locked in their homes. Screaming to their neighbors and to the universe just because they were hungry. They weren't allowed to leave their houses, and there was no food.
It's becoming better now. I mean, ecocide as a word is becoming better known around the world, and the concept is generally mass damage and destruction of nature. But legally speaking, what our organisation and other collaborators aim to do is to have this recognised legally as a serious crime. Because one of the issues that sort of pervades all of this discussion is that we have a kind of cultural, very ingrained habit of not taking damage to nature as seriously as we take damage to people and property. And that, I mean, you know, if you're campaigning for human rights, at least you know mass murder, torture, all of these things are serious crimes.
She's saying...
But there's no...
She's saying that farming is murder. So we should be able to control the farming so we can control the murder rate. Because, like, they're going to be able to do it any better. They're just going to tell you that they did it better and cover up all of the nonsense. And who's going to tell them that they can't do it if they're the ones who control everything?
Equivalent in the environmental space. And so, you know, unlike an international crime like genocide that involves a specific intent, with ecocide, what we see is actually what people are trying to do, what businesses are trying to do, is make money, is farm, is fish, is do all of these things that are, producing energy and so on, as well. But what's missing is the awareness and the conscience around the side effects, around the collateral damage that happens with that.
All right, let's get off of that. What's this? Is it the one? Yeah, we listened to that already. Where's that one?
This notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true.
Yeah, so he just said basically that Canada's been compromised by the WEF, and that's what's causing all these problems up there right now. And they have compromised the United States, WHO and WEF. I bet half, just like Canada, I bet half of them are World Economic Forum shills and puppets. And he's literally saying that one of their big goals is to plant their WEF shills into the world governments. Like, these guys, they don't even hold back, because who's going to stop them if they control everything? Just like governments, you can't fight against a government because there's nobody above them. So if there's nobody above these guys, if a country decides that they're going to go to war with them, you know what they're going to do? They're going to not go to that country because they control the world. And then they'll just declare war on that country and take it anyway. That's what's been happening. That's what's been happening for the past 100 years, is just garbage like this. People that have world agendas want to take control, and they cause wars to happen and civil wars to happen so that they can have more control and better control while they destroy everything and lock you in a box and feed you scraps